Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The hum of the washing machine filled the quiet suburban home. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting dappled shadows across the hardwood floors. A young man stood before the machine, arms crossed, waiting for the cycle to finish. John drummed his fingers against his bicep, impatience etched on his face. He'd promised Aunt Margaret he'd take care of the house while she was away on her Caribbean cruise. That included keeping up with the laundry, but now, watching the last few minutes tick by on the machine's digital display, John found himself wishing he'd put this chore off for another day. The washer let out a cheerful chime. John yanked open the door, grabbing handfuls of damp clothes and tossing them into a nearby basket. He hefted it onto his hip, padding barefoot down the hallway towards the backyard. A warm breeze ruffled John's dark hair as he stepped onto the back porch. The clothesline stretched between two weathered posts, fluttering sheets already dancing in the wind. John set the basket down with a thud, wiping his brow. "All right, let's get this over with," he muttered. One by one, John began hanging the clothes. T-shirts, jeans, socks, all the usual suspects. But as he reached deeper into the basket, his hand brushed against something silky. Frowning, John pulled out a gauzy lavender dress. What the... He stared at the garment, realization dawning. Crap, must have mixed up Aunt Margaret's stuff with mine. John held the dress at arm's length, unsure what to do. It was a pretty thing. Delicate straps, a flowing skirt that would hit just above the knee. Nothing like the sensible pantsuits his aunt usually favored. Guess she likes to cut loose on vacation, John mused. He draped the dress over the line, smoothing out a wrinkle. As he continued emptying the basket, more unfamiliar items emerged. A silky camisole, a pair of lacy underwear that made John's cheeks flush, and at the very bottom, a shoebox. Curiosity got the better of him. John pried open the lid, revealing a pair of glossy red high heels. He whistled low, running a finger along the pointed toe. Damn, Aunt Margaret. Didn't know you had it in you. The sun beat down on John's shoulders as he finished hanging the laundry. But his mind kept drifting back to that dress, those heels. He'd never seen his aunt wear anything like them. Hell, he'd never worn anything like them himself. John shook his head, gathering up the empty basket. Get it together, man, he muttered. But as he turned to head inside, his gaze lingered on the lavender fabric swaying in the breeze. Back in the coolness of the house, John paced the living room. He couldn't shake the image of those clothes from his mind. It was ridiculous. They were just bits of fabric. But something about them called to him, sparked a curiosity he'd never experienced before. This is stupid, John said aloud, running a hand through his hair. They're just clothes. It doesn't mean anything. But even as the words left his mouth, John found himself moving towards the back door. He hesitated, hand on the doorknob. This was crossing a line, a weird, undefined line he'd never considered before. Screw it. John marched back outside, making a beeline for the clothesline. The dress was still there, looking even more enticing than before. With trembling fingers, John unclipped it from the line. The fabric felt cool and smooth against his skin. Back inside, John laid the dress out on his bed. He stared at it for a long moment, heart pounding. What was he doing? This was insane! And yet... Before he could talk himself out of it, John stripped off his t-shirt and jeans. Taking a deep breath, he slipped the dress over his head. The silky material whispered against his skin as it settled into place. John turned, catching sight of himself in the full-length mirror on the closet door. His breath caught in his throat. The dress hugged his waist before flaring out at the hips, creating the illusion of curves where there were none. The color complemented his olive skin tone perfectly. "Holy shit," John breathed. He ran his hands down his sides, marveling at the way the fabric felt. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced before. A giddy laugh bubbled up from his chest. John twirled, watching the skirt billow out around him. He felt pretty, beautiful even. It was a completely foreign sensation, but one that sent a thrill through his entire body. John's eyes fell on the shoebox he'd brought in with the dress, the heels. His heart raced as he retrieved them, turning the shiny red shoes over in his hands. He'd never worn heels before, didn't even know if they'd fit, but there was only one way to find out. Sitting on the edge of the bed, John slipped his feet into the shoes. They were a little tight, but not unbearably so. He stood carefully, wobbling as he tried to find his balance. "Whoa!" John gasped, grabbing onto the bedpost for support. How did women walk in these things? He took a tentative step, then another. Slowly, he made his way back to the mirror. The transformation was complete. John hardly recognized the person staring back at him. The heels elongated his legs, making them look impossibly long and shapely. Combined with the dress, the effect was stunning. A warmth spread through John's chest. This felt right somehow, like he was seeing a part of himself he'd kept hidden away for years. He struck a pose, hand on hip, and grinned at his reflection. "Well, hello there, gorgeous," he purred, then dissolved into laughter. For the next hour, John experimented with different poses and walks. He sashayed across the room, hips swaying. He practiced his smolder in the mirror, batting his eyelashes dramatically. It was silly and over the top, but John had never felt so free. As the afternoon wore on, John's confidence grew. He no longer wobbled in the heels, instead striding with purpose. The dress felt like a second skin, moving with him as naturally as breathing. John found himself wondering what it would be like to go out dressed like this, to feel the sun on his bare shoulders, the breeze against his legs. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. "Baby steps," he murmured, smoothing down the skirt. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Still, the idea nagged at him. John glanced out the window, noting the empty driveways of the neighboring houses. Most people would be at work right now. The backyard was fenced in, completely private. Maybe... Before he could talk himself out of it, John was heading for the back door. He paused with his hand on the knob, taking a deep breath. This was crazy. What if someone saw? "Screw it," John said again, and stepped outside. The warm air caressed his bare skin, sending goosebumps racing up his arms. John closed his eyes, savoring the sensation. When he opened them again, he felt a newfound sense of freedom. With growing confidence, John made his way down the porch steps. The grass tickled his ankles as he strode across the lawn. He twirled again, laughing as the skirt billowed around him. For the first time in his life, John felt truly alive. Every sensation was heightened. The warmth of the sun, the whisper of the breeze, the softness of the fabric against his skin. He spread his arms wide, tilting his face up to the sky. "This is amazing!" he shouted, not caring if anyone heard. John spent the next hour exploring the backyard as if seeing it for the first time. He admired flowers he'd never paid attention to before, marveling at their delicate petals. He ran his hands over the rough bark of the old oak tree, feeling its strength and solidity. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, John reluctantly headed back inside. He couldn't risk being seen by the neighbors returning home from work. But the giddiness of the afternoon lingered. making him feel light as air. Back in his room, John gazed at his reflection once more. The person staring back at him was different now, freer, more complete somehow. He smiled, running a hand down the front of the dress. "Well," he said softly, "this changes everything." John knew he should change back into his regular clothes. Put the dress and heels away, pretend this afternoon had never happened. But the thought of giving up this newfound part of himself made his chest ache. Instead, John found himself rifling through his aunt's closet. He pulled out blouses and skirts, dresses in every color of the rainbow. Each item sparked a thrill of excitement. "Let's see what else we can find," John murmured, a mischievous glint in his eye. He started with a floral sundress, twirling in front of the mirror. Then a sleek black cocktail number that made him feel like a movie star. A flirty miniskirt paired with an off-the-shoulder top had John practicing his catwalk strut. With each new outfit, John felt his confidence soar. He experimented with different ways of moving, of carrying himself. Sometimes he felt bold, other times soft and demure. It was like trying on different versions of himself, seeing which ones fit best. As the afternoon wore on, John's explorations grew bolder. He discovered a makeup bag tucked away in his aunt's vanity. With shaking hands, he applied a swipe of red lipstick. The effect was electric. "Hello, beautiful," John whispered to his reflection. The person staring back at him was a stranger, but one he desperately wanted to know better. He experimented with eyeshadow next, creating a smoky look that made his brown eyes pop. Blush added a rosy glow to his cheeks. By the time he was finished, John barely recognized himself. But he'd never felt more alive. The sun had long since set by the time John finally changed back into his own clothes. But even as he carefully hung up the dresses and put away the makeup, he knew something fundamental had shifted. He couldn't go back to who he was before. John lay in bed that night, mind racing. What did this mean? Was he gay? Trans? Just a guy who liked wearing dresses sometimes? The labels felt confining, unable to capture the complexity of what he was feeling. "I don't know what I am," John whispered into the darkness. "But I know who I want to be." The next morning dawned bright and clear. John went through his usual routine: shower, shave, breakfast. But there was an undercurrent of excitement thrumming through him. He had the whole day ahead of him, and endless possibilities. After tidying up the kitchen, John found himself drawn back to his aunt's closet. He ran his hands over the hanging garments, savoring the different textures: silk and cotton, leather and lace. Each one held the promise of a new experience. "All right," John said, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's see what we can do today." He selected a breezy white sundress with yellow flowers scattered across the fabric. It reminded him of lazy summer days and fresh-squeezed lemonade. John slipped it on, relishing the way the material skimmed over his skin. A pair of delicate sandals completed the look. John was getting better at walking in heels, but sometimes it was nice to keep things simple. He twirled in front of the mirror, watching the skirt flare out around him. "Not bad," he mused, striking a pose. "But something's missing." John rummaged through his aunt's jewelry box, pulling out a long strand of pearls. He draped them around his neck, the cool beads a stark contrast to his warm skin. A pair of white-framed sunglasses perched on his nose completed the transformation.
"Now that's more like it,"
John said, admiring his reflection. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a 1950s fashion magazine. Elegant, feminine, and utterly fabulous. The day stretched out before him, full of possibilities. John was tempted to stay inside, to keep this new version of himself hidden away. but the sunshine streaming through the windows called to him. He wanted to feel the warmth on his bare shoulders, the breeze against his legs.
Screw it,
John said, the phrase quickly becoming his new mantra. Let's go for a walk. Heart pounding, John made his way to the front door. He hesitated, hand on the knob. This was different than venturing into the backyard. Anyone could see him out there. What if someone recognized him? But the thrill of possibility outweighed his fear. Taking a deep breath, John opened the door and stepped outside. The world looked different through the lenses of his sunglasses. Brighter, somehow. More vibrant. John took a few tentative steps down the front path, his sandals clicking against the concrete. A car drove by and John tensed, but the driver didn't even glance his way. Emboldened, John continued down the sidewalk. He focused on his posture, on the sway of his hips. With each step, his confidence grew. The neighborhood was quiet, most people at work or school. But as John rounded the corner onto a busier street, he saw other pedestrians, a jogger, a woman walking her dog, an elderly couple holding hands. John's heart raced as he passed them. But no one gave him a second glance. To them, he was just another person out for a morning stroll. The realization was liberating. As he walked, John found himself noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way the sunlight dappled through the leaves of overhanging trees, the cheerful colors of flower beds in front yards, the gentle tinkling of wind chimes carried on the breeze. It was like seeing the world through new eyes. Everything felt fresher, more alive. John breathed deeply, savoring the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. His wanderings eventually led him to a small park. John settled onto a bench, crossing his legs daintily at the ankle. He tilted his face up to the sun, relishing its warmth on his skin. For the first time in his life, John felt truly comfortable in his own skin. It was as if he'd been wearing a costume his whole life and had finally found the courage to take it off. This, the dress, the pearls, the gentle sway of his hips as he walked. This was the real him. A flutter of wings caught John's attention. A bright blue jay had landed on a nearby branch, regarding him with curious eyes. John smiled, raising a hand in greeting.
Beautiful day, isn't it?
He said softly. The bird cocked its head, as if considering his words. Then it let out a cheerful trill before taking flight once more. John watched it soar away, feeling a kinship with the free-spirited creature. As the morning wore on, more people filtered into the park. Mothers with strollers, teenagers on skateboards, elderly folks out for their daily constitutional. John tensed at first, worried someone would see through his disguise. But as time passed and no one batted an eye, he began to relax. He people-watched, admiring outfits and imagining stories for the passers-by. That woman in the crisp business suit was clearly a high-powered executive. The teenage girl with bright pink hair was destined to be a rock star. The little boy chasing butterflies would grow up to be a famous naturalist. John was so lost in his musings that he didn't notice the figure approaching until a shadow fell across his lap. He looked up, heart leaping into his throat. A woman stood before him, probably in her early 60s. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Excuse me, dear," she said, "but I just had to tell you how lovely you look. That dress is absolutely darling on you." For a moment, John couldn't breathe. This was it. She'd seen through his disguise. Any second now, she'd start shouting, calling him a freak. But the woman just continued to smile warmly. John swallowed hard, pitching his voice higher as he replied, "Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you to say." The woman's smile widened. "You're quite welcome, dear. It's so nice to see young people embracing classic styles. You don't see many girls your age in such elegant dresses these days." John's heart soared. She thought he was a woman, a young woman even. He felt a rush of gratitude towards this kind stranger. "Well, you know what they say," John replied, gaining confidence. "Everything old becomes new again eventually." The woman laughed delightedly. "How right you are, my dear. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Enjoy this beautiful day." As she walked away, John felt a warmth spreading through his chest. He'd done it. He'd fooled someone. More than that, he'd been complimented. Accepted. It was an intoxicating feeling. Buoyed by the encounter, John decided to push his boundaries even further. He stood, smoothing down his skirt. There was a small cafe just down the street. The thought of ordering a coffee, of interacting with a barista while dressed like this, both terrified and thrilled him. "Nothing ventured, nothing gained," John murmured, setting off down the path. The cafe was bustling when John arrived. He joined the line, heart pounding. What if his voice gave him away? What if someone recognized him? But as he reached the counter, a calm settled over him. This was just another test, another opportunity to embrace this new side of himself. The barista, a young woman with a nose ring, smiled brightly.
"What can I get for you today?"
John pitched his voice higher, the way he'd practiced in the mirror. "I'll have a vanilla latte, please. To go." If the barista noticed anything amiss, she didn't show it. She just nodded, ringing up the order. "Name for the cup?" John hesitated for just a moment. Then, "Jane." As he waited for his drink, John marveled at how natural this all felt. He'd been so worried about being found out, about people staring or whispering, but no one gave him a second glance. He was just another customer, going about his day. "Vanilla latte for Jane." John collected his drink, offering the barista a warm smile. "Thank you so much. Have a lovely day." Back out on the street, John sipped his latte, relishing the creamy sweetness. He'd done it. He'd successfully navigated a social interaction while dressed as a woman. The rush of accomplishment was better than any caffeine buzz. As he strolled back towards his aunt's house, John felt a new sense of possibility unfurling within him. This didn't have to be a one-time thing. He could explore this side of himself further, maybe even find others like him, a community where he could truly be himself. The sun was high in the sky by the time John returned home. He kicked off his sandals, wiggling his toes in the plush carpet. The house felt different now, filled with potential. Every room held the promise of a new experience, a new facet of himself to explore. John caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. The person staring back at him was radiant, cheeks flushed with excitement. He looked happy, truly, genuinely happy. "Well, Jane," he said softly, a smile playing at his lips, "I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship." As the afternoon wore on, John found himself reluctant to change out of the sundress. It had become a symbol of his newfound freedom, a tangible reminder of the exhilarating morning he'd experienced. But practicality won out in the end. He couldn't risk getting it dirty or wrinkled. With a wistful sigh, John slipped the dress over his head. He hung it carefully in the closet, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles. But even as he changed back into his usual jeans and t-shirt, John knew things would never be the same. He'd crossed a line, discovered a part of himself he could never ignore again. The rest of the day passed in a blur of mundane chores and errands. John did the dishes, vacuumed the living room, made a quick trip to the grocery store, but his mind kept drifting back to the feeling of the sundress against his skin, the click of heels on pavement, the rush of being seen as a woman. As night fell, John found himself once again drawn to his aunt's closet. He ran his fingers over the hanging garments, marveling at the variety of colors and textures. Each item held the promise of a new experience, a new facet of himself to explore.
What's next?
John murmured, a smile playing at his lips. The possibilities seemed endless. He selected a silky nightgown in a deep burgundy color. The material whispered against his skin as he slipped it on, sending a shiver down his spine. John admired his reflection in the mirror, struck by how natural it felt. Padding barefoot into the kitchen, John put on the kettle for a cup of chamomile tea. As he waited for the water to boil, he found himself swaying gently, enjoying the way the nightgown moved with him. It was like a dance, fluid and graceful. Cup of tea in hand, John curled up on the couch. He pulled a throw blanket over his legs, relishing the contrast between the soft fleece and the smooth silk of the nightgown. For the first time in his life, he felt truly comfortable in his own skin. As he sipped his tea, John's mind wandered to the future. What would happen when his aunt returned from her trip? Could he find a way to continue exploring this side of himself? The thought of going back to his old life, of pretending this part of him didn't exist, made his chest ache.
One day at a time,
John reminded himself. He couldn't predict the future, but he could savor the present moment. Setting his empty mug aside, John stretched out on the couch. The nightgown rode up slightly, exposing his legs. He marveled at how smooth they looked, how feminine. Maybe tomorrow he'd try shaving them, see how that felt. As he drifted off to sleep, John's mind was filled with visions of sundresses and high heels, of pearls and lipstick. But more than that, he dreamed of freedom, of a world where he could be exactly who he wanted to be, without fear or shame. In the quiet of the night, a smile played across John's lips. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He'd finally found his true self, and he was never letting go.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!